Hi, everybody. This is Harchin Singh from 3 Tier Investing. This is going to be our recorded session for the watch list. So we are doing it on Monday instead of our normal Sundays. So today's recording is going to be looking at setups for Tuesday, Tuesday being the next market day. The goal is to use these sessions to help educate you guys on how we do charting, how we look for patterns, the different things that we want to pay attention to. So with that being said, I've got Avneet Singh, one of the other co-founders, and Arion, who is one of our senior analysts. Thanks you guys for coming out today. I appreciate y'all spending your time.
Yes, sir.
Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So we did get a couple requests for tickers to look at, but we'll cover everything in today's session. Arion, Avneet, were there any tickers you guys wanted to start off by taking a look at?
Yeah, can you check TRCH?
No problem.
It's an energy company.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch to the 4 hour. Okay,
They've been really running, and I did set a fib, but it'd be cool if you broke it down for everyone else as well. What you're seeing?
Yes, no problem at all. So let's take a look at long term. Been a pretty exponential growth. I don't want to set a Fibonacci based off this because this data is almost useless compared to where it is right now. So I'm going to switch over to the 1 hour. And what we're seeing is within, this was May of 21st. So within a month or two, really just 1 month, they've gone 500%. So I'm going to start by setting a Fibonacci at 1088, which is the high, and I'm going to bring it down to about 218, just because that's where the low is. So if you see this low and you see this high, that's how you set your Fibonacci. Now, for those of you who are using it for the first time, if you go from high to low, that's going to set your Fibonacci for upwards, right? So if you're assuming the price is going to go up, but if I were to go from, and I'm not going to be accurate with this because the goal is to show you, but if you see those lines at the bottom, they're getting, more expansive towards the bearish trend. That's how you set Fibonacci for a stock that's falling. So just something to pay attention to. So I'm just going to set this up real quick. Right click, edit properties. And what that'll do is that'll allow me to fine tune the Fibonacci. So if you can't get the exact spot, you don't have to stress about it too much. You can always adjust it like this. I'm going to hit OK. And now we've got our Fibonacci set up on the hourly, but I'm going to go to the 15 because I want to see a little bit more information about how it's been moving. I'm going to extend my time frame to about 30 days. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of this movement happened very, very recently. Now, real quick, I'm just going to add a price. Nah, it's not worth it. So what I'm seeing here is I'm going to start by doing this. I see a little bit of a gap in the stock price. So a gap just means that between after hours and pre-market, the stock moved a substantial amount to where it opened. It's substantially higher than where it closed, or substantially lower than where it closed. So that's what we see here. Generally, when there's a gap, that means that a stock either did really, really well in pre-market or after hours, or that there's a huge amount of volatility and it's supposed to be corrected, which is why we say gaps get filled. In this case, that's not what we saw at all. What we did see is, I want to zoom in a little bit more on this right here, right? So we saw the stock gap up. And then over here, we saw the price get real close to our 38.2 line. But then we saw this huge volume kick in. So if you see at the bottom, the bull volume is getting much higher, right? And in a situation like that, that's what it takes to break through a Fibonacci line. So Fibonacci lines are very simple. They're predetermined by the formula as support and resistance levels. And, where there's a resistance, it's going to be hard to break, obviously, right? As the word goes. So if you have enough volume to break through it, that's what can be a good catalyst. But what we see here is it breaks through, finds a bit of a high here. And I'm actually going to add a price line right about here at $6.10. The reason I put it exactly there is for a couple of reasons, right? I see that it had turbulence here, and I use the word turbulence because it reminds me of airplanes, right? It's not going up, it's not going down, but it's a little shaky where it is at right now. So that's what we see here. I'm going to add another price line right over here, and we're going to switch back to our circle tool. That's because we can see it bounced off here, and then we saw another gap here, and then it failed on our Fibonacci, came down, found a base on this Fibonacci at $5.50, tried and then failed on our resistance line at $6.10. So this is that second point of contact, right? We had one here, we had one here, and then I'll just make it simple. Right around here, we see it kind of travel along the line. Again, that's what we call turbulence, right? So we see that for the most part, it's been traveling between this range of $6.11 and about $5 or so plus change. So these two have become a range for us. So if I really wanted to, I could say that TRCH was traveling in a range up until the 18th, which was very recently, about a couple days ago last week, right? And when we say it's trading in a range, what that means is trading, within the support and resistance level, and it intrigues us when it breaks through. So even though this is trading in a range, we see that it's failing on the Fibonacci. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is it's because it's so important to understand when it makes sense to enter a stock. Now we can see that for TRCH in the past, they've gone up to 675 and still failed and come down. So we want to find a price above this 675 mark, right? But since we're doing analysis, we see that that's already hit. So today in pre-market after and Friday's after hours, those two combined, we see this huge gap in TRCH pricing. And that's when we saw it. You see this huge green volume, right? Over here, remember when we said it broke through that Fibonacci level? Or excuse me, there was a gap here. That volume basically capped out at about $32 million, or excuse me, 32.7 million shares, I apologize, that were being traded within that 15-minute time frame. So what we see here is for today, or excuse me, on the 21st, correct? Within the first 15 minutes, there were 39 million shares that were traded. So what does that tell us, right? What we're looking at right now is called price action. Price action helps us understand how the stock price is moving in relation to its price and the volume. And, you can use indicators to help figure that out, but it's the action of the price, quite literally, right? So here's what we see. We see that the price for TRCH spiked all the way up to 1088, which is how we found this Fibonacci, and then it failed. So if you guys understand how candles work, right? So there's two components to it. You've got the body and the wick.
If I may interject,
Yeah, go ahead.
In the after hours movement, I don't know if that's like something you want to cover as well. It did touch thing over 1150.
Okay, so yeah, I just enabled
two.
after hours. Okay, so this is what we're
So
looking.
does that change your analysis?
Not as of yet, but I'm really glad you brought that up because I usually keep my after hours disabled, just because it's not something that's normally helped me. But what I am seeing here is that there was this consistent growth, right, throughout the day. So one thing I want you to pay attention to here is you see how the stock's price is starting to fall. A lot of times when we're investing, we don't know what it's going to fall to, and we always feel like, oh, it's going to go to zero. But I want you to pay attention to one thing. You see how the bear volume is dropping. What that means is that it's losing steam, right? So a move will continue. Think about it like the law of physics, right? An object in motion will stay in motion until something changes that. But you see here, right? A play will be in play until it runs out of steam. That's the way to think about it. And what we see here is that, yeah, they're bringing the price down, but they're running out of steam. And when you see something like this here, where the volume is the same and it's kind of sitting on the same price, we can look at something like that and say, okay, that's a potential reversal. And we would add a price line right over here because that tells us that's a bit of a bottom for the stock price. So we see that around the price of $8.30, TRCH was able to find a base. And then you see that the bull volume started picking up again around 12 o'clock. So that's when we saw this huge break, retested the Fibonacci, tried again. And then you can see the volume started to get a little higher. And in a situation like this, if you notice, they tried to bring the price down right over here. I'm going to zoom in a bit more. And it failed on the Fibonacci, found a base, and continued to rise. So that's where this trend line comes in handy. And I'm actually going to change the color. Excuse me, I'm going to change the width so we can see it a little bit better. But that's what we see. It continued on this linear growth all the way into after hours, touched this 1170 price mark. And then from there, it was able to tank and find its way back. So now if you see this line that was a support, kind of looks like a resistance. If we go to the 5-minute, That's what we're seeing, right? So that same line for us that was a support and it would bounce off is now the resistance. And you can see that the volume is, I don't want to say irregular because it is after hours, but it's not great. And if we look at the right, you can see our active trader. It's telling you that around this 1062 mark, it's they're buying and they're selling at these levels. So I wonder if this will show us the volume. Probably not for after hours. But you can see around this mark, you've had 14 million shares being traded at this 1061 range. So that's just some technically between 1061 to 1211 to 911. So that's just something to pay attention to, is if you look at the numbers of where people are buying, right? You can see there's 99 shares being sold and then there's like a couple being bought. That can help you figure out what direction the stock is going to go in. So taking a look at TRCH, right, on a more grand scale, we've fallen below this trend line. So what that tells me is that that trend is no more. Now we need to wait a little bit to see what type of trend it's going to form. Now, granted, on the long-term scale, this seems like a phenomenal stock because it's just growing exponentially. But personally, if I were not invested in this stock and I were looking at it from a fresh perspective, I would want to see a little bit more stability from the stock. Because if we look at how it moved in after hours, right? And if we were to try and piece, and I don't want to draw too many support and resistance lines because that can confuse us. But if we see right around this $10 mark, right, we can see that it failed and then started coming. And then you see how it started consolidating here. So this almost, I don't want to say it looks like an ascending triangle, but actually, Ariane, what do you think? Does this, it kind of looks like one to me. But I'd love to hear your input on that.
No, I would not call that an ascending triangle just because it needs more points to touch a certain line. So the
Absolutely.
top trend line, it needs more points to touch it than just a couple like that.
That's exactly what I was thinking, and I'm glad you said that. So if you guys were hearing, not everything is a trend. Sometimes a price will move in a direction until it eventually becomes a trend. So, um, as humans, we try to make sense of what we see. That doesn't mean that everything's a pattern. It's okay for this to just be a straight linear move. But with this being said, I think that Torch, we're currently at 1048 in terms of price. If it falls below 1011, I would expect it to hover around 965, and below that it could go to $9. Below that it could go to 825. Now, in terms of growth potential, it can be a little bit difficult because we're looking at long-term, um, we're looking at like long-term record highs, right? 1170 is the highest it's ever been. Don't forget, this stock used to cost $2 at one point. So keeping that in mind, obviously we've got our
30
Fibonacci here.
cents. 30
30
cents.
exactly. So it's insane. And in fact, we've actually done penny stock plays on this one before, Arion. I think you had like an 80% play on this back in the day. um
Yep.
I
yeah,
guess I kind of also want to add into like my strategy with this.
sure.
So I saw, so I ended up taking an entry this morning because I saw the volume was high, and I can explain why I was comfortable, even though the price is so high. I was able to sell, so I was able to enter the position, and I bought a few hundred shares, and I was able to sell contracts, which were very juiced because if you take a look at the gap that Hurton drew, it increased so much last night alone that it spiked the implied volatility up to like 280, 270 percent, which is a lot, and that drastically increases the implied the premiums. So I sold calls for about 250 a piece. So that inadvertently just lowers my cost basis. So I bought my shares around $9, but because I was able to sell a call right away for about 250, I actually got those shares at about 650. So it was
Beautiful.
a real steal. And if let's say it comes down, I'll be able to collect that premium because it's $1 call, and I can just sell calls at the $7.5 calls and get probably another 100 or 200, lowering my cost basis down to $4 or $5, which makes this play really profitable.
Yeah, that's sweet, man. I'm really glad you brought that up because when it comes to trading, there's so many different strategies. There's a million different ways to make money. So to me, I look at that as that's a great reminder that there's no need to be impatient. There's no need to really worry about a specific strategy. If it's not working, ditch it, you'll find another way to make money. So selling calls and doing all that, phenomenal way to add passive income. So thanks for sharing that, Avneet. I'm really glad. So in terms of future outlook, above 1170, because I'm looking at, right, we had a high at 1080, then it went to 1170. If I were to just assume, and I'm not saying this is an accurate way of finding it, but what I'm seeing is it tends to be moving in a dollar or two formation, right? So assuming that the volume makes sense tomorrow and there is enough attention on the market, I think this could hit 13 plus. I'd be very surprised if it hit 16. It would need a lot of volume, like similar amounts to today, right? Because you see how much this jumped, right? I think that we would need to see a lot of volume. But assuming that the attention's there, it could hit 16 in the future. But I really can't say anything for sure until we see how it interacts tomorrow. But before I move on to the next stocks, is there anything you guys want to mention about this one?
I would say take because we have to be like considerate of like the market we're in. I would say that a lot of our market is unfortunately driven by a lot of Wall Street Bets comments. So if this is a stock that's highly talked about in the Wall Street Bets Reddit community, this could definitely reach new highs and break that $16 level. But if it's not getting as much attention as AMC or BB, then we might not see that break. But that's just something to keep in mind because that Reddit community can really move stocks. Just like we saw with GME.
Yeah. Normally we don't like to, attack stocks that are being pumped because that goes against discipline and that's not what we normally teach. But, we've seen that our analysis has actually ended up being something that Wall Street Bets finds a couple months later. We've known about TRCH for a while and then they'll pump it and we'll end up winning just out of sheer luck. So if the fundamentals make sense, if the numbers are there, that's the only reason you should invest. It just so happens that, we've got the guiding force and the numbers make sense right now, and the fundamentals. So all that being said, I think we should move forward to the next one because we do have quite a few to take a look at today. So as always, Apple is a staple. I'm going to remove after hours. Just again, when we do analysis, I feel that it helps us clean up a little bit more. So I'm going to switch to the 4 hour. You're going to see a lot of different lines. Don't be intimidated. This happens every once in a while. You need to do a purge. So I'm thinking, all of this, while it was helpful, let's go to the 1 hour. What are we seeing overall? Stock price has fallen and it's basically forming within this triangle, but it started to break out. So let's go to the 1 hour and I'm going to extend my time frame to about 90 days. And what we saw was that it was trading in a range here. This was a supply zone for it. So every time Apple's price would enter this range, it would fall. And generally what that tells us is you don't enter the stock price until it breaks through the resistance above, right? So entry would have been around 128.50. But this was also last week. So looking at where we are right now, I'm starting to notice a bit of a price resistance right around this 132.35 mark. Now, realistically, I wouldn't enter until about 132.75, or I'd even wait until 133.15 or so, because if you see here, right, if you were to enter as soon as it went above the line, you could enter at 131.69 and you'd be caught in this fake out and you could start losing money, right? And the whole goal is to play disciplined trades that make sense, and make you money in the grand scheme of things. So in terms of Apple, I probably wouldn't enter because I've got this trend line from, Lord knows how long ago, going back to around here. This goes back to February, right? Because we saw a little bit of a consolidation before it fell. And that's just something that I've had for a while. So looking at that, I know that stocks follow similar patterns. I probably wouldn't enter until about 133.25. And I'd take my first profits at 134. And above 134, I would look at 135.35. But again, what it all comes down to is volume. And if you see here, this 134 price line is very, very tough. Actually, more so the 135.35. We can see numerous times it's tried to cross this Fibonacci, fails, crosses, failed. And even when it does cross, it fails at this resistance, right? So I want to be very, very careful in these upcoming times, because if we're able to break through this 134, we can see that level of 137. But I think we've got a little bit of way to go, because if you see, the volume has been like very consistent across the board. Like overall day market volume stays right around 10 million, right? You can see that most of the volume kind of ends there. You have your bursts in the beginning of the day, or you'll have some type of news that affects it. Um, but Apple is a fairly stable stock, which is why people buy it, right? For long term. So in terms of options, I want to be very careful entering at 133.25. I want to be extremely careful around 134. And before I even touch 135.30 or so, I want to be out. And that would just be for a quick scalp, right? The goal is with something like this, I would want to close my position unless I'm very confident based on the volume that it's going to continue forward. And at that point, I'd even consider opening a different position, lock in my profits from before, and then, either play with the profits or a smaller amount, because it's very risky. If it does break through, you're looking at something very profitable. 135 to 137 could be about a 60% play with the right contract. So there is a lot of potential, but it is very, very risky. So we want to be very careful as we watch here. So to reiterate, once again, my signal or my entry point would be at around 133.25. I'd take my first profit level, or I'd be careful around 134, and I'd want to be out by 135.25 or so. And then for puts, I would want to look at my Fibonacci line here. Let's see. I want to enter around 130.50 or 130.25 or so, because we see that it's bounced off that line. And then I take profits at 129.50. Then I take profits at 128.50. And you're probably wondering, right? For example, I have this line at 128.42. If this is the resistance, and I know that the stock is very likely to bounce off, think about it like this. By the time you get your order set up, by the time you're ready to sell, if the stock starts bouncing back, you're in a bad position. You're starting to lose money. So the goal is by 128.50, when it hits that target, we've started the order, we're ready to sell, and we're not going to get caught in some type of rebound or some type of bounce off. The goal is to make this play as safe as possible while maximizing our strategy and maximizing the amount of money we can make. So we'd go from about 130.25 to 129.25 to about 128.50. Are there any questions about those? Or of Neat Darian, do you guys want to add anything, or would you necessarily
Yeah.
agree?
So I'm really bullish on Apple the next couple weeks. And what I think is going to happen is Apple's going to come down that top trend line, test it, and then bounce above it. And I think once it tests the trend line, bounces above it, I think that's going to be really bullish. And also, I want to say that Fitz sent an article today by Benzinga, and they're looking at the exact same thing we are, like the exact same thing.
Really? Beautiful.
Yeah, and they're bullish on it. They were talking about how it looks like it wants to make new all-time highs around 145.09.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful. No, I'm really glad you brought that up. Go ahead.
Another thing is that I personally looked into buying leaps maybe 2 weeks ago or a week ago in the 129 level for the same reason. I'm really bullish on Apple, and that leap options actually up about 15 to 20%. So no, sorry. It's like 7 to 10%. But yeah, I'm also fairly bullish on Apple.
Okay, no, that's sweet. So at least if you're watching this video, you've heard about the cons, right? You've heard about different levels that we're nervous about, but you've also heard more about, the public sentiment and understanding where it's going. It's really important to understand that with the market, like Avneet was saying, it's very volatile and not everything makes clear-cut sense like it's supposed to. So it's always good to prepare for both sides, because you never know what'll reverse. But if it does, you'll know exactly how to handle that situation. So always prepare yourself for a situation where things may not go your way, but if they do, you're ready. And if they don't, you're still ready. With that being said, let's look at the next one. I'm going to take a look at Best Buy. So let's switch to the 4-hour. I was doing some analysis earlier. Yeah, as you can see, we were doing a bit of a tutorial on Best Buy earlier. So if we go to the 4-hour, what I'm seeing is that this is directionally bearish, but it was able to bounce off this lower Fibonacci point of 106.66. So I'm going to switch to the 1 hour, and what am I seeing? I'm seeing a lot of volatility, but I'm also seeing that Best Buy does a pretty good job of following Fibonacci, which tells me that as I start trading this more and more, I can rely on the support and resistance lines. One thing to keep in mind is when we see these market opens, Best Buy seems to be very volatile, right? We're seeing this huge drop in the day, and then we're seeing it slowly recover to the point where by the end of the or by the start of the next day, we've already recuperated half of this drop. So just something to pay attention to. You know, there's a lot of volatility after hours and pre-market. So I'm not going to pull it up. That being said, it's important to pay attention to these patterns. It's important to pay attention to these type of things because I think in the grand scheme of it, they will tell you what you need to look for. So that being said, what we're seeing right now is that Best Buy failed off this line, was unable to cross. You can see that it tried to. So I set up a bit of a trend line here, and we saw that I can remove this. I can remove this one. We saw that it started to, follow this trend line on the way up. Tried this trend line, failed, and started to come back down, and it fell below this level of 109. So keeping that in mind, I would probably look for an entry around 108, and I'm looking at the bottom of this green candle for that. But at the same time, I'm a little concerned. I would probably say 107.70 or 107.50 or so, and then ride that down to about 106.75. And the reason I say that is because in the past, we've seen it fall from a similar trend level and build its way back up. And we don't want to be caught in that reversal, right? So if we were to play puts, and we definitely want to see how it's going to perform. So maybe we can just pull it up, might as well. What we see after hours is nothing, nothing of value. So basically it's been trading sideways, which is fine. So I would look for an entry around 107.75. And from there, I would look for a drop to about 106.75. And I think I'd keep it pretty reasonable because if we look at the history again for the 4 hour, it hasn't found too many opportunities to fall below. This has been a pretty critical price point. We saw it bounce off here, saw turbulence here, we saw it bounce off here. So there's generally 3 points where, and even here you can see tried, retested, and then bounced off. So we have 4 different points in our history that 106.66 has played a very critical price point. So if it were to fall below 106, and we were to go back, you can see that generally every time it's fallen below, it's been extremely drastic. So I'm going to look at some of these levels. Let's see. Overall, that's pretty bearish. Some of these lines, I'm doing more so for me to help visualize a little better. They're not exactly trends, but we see it found a base here. So I'm going to add one here. And that gives me a target of about 101.73. However, right on the way back, seeing levels somewhere around 104. I don't see what I normally would like to, but I do think in true honesty, the last time we were able to fall below 106.66, it was pretty dramatic, right? And when we found our way back, it was pretty dramatic as well. So generally, these patterns tend to follow each other. If we were to fall below 106.66, I could see a pretty bearish move to about 102. And to be honest, with a drop like that, I'd probably even go to like 103 maybe. I think that'd be a little bit more reasonable. And we also want to follow discipline, right? We want to make sure that we're taking profits as we go. As for calls, I would want to see something above 110.50. And because if you see here, right, you have the H and you have the L, that's the high and the low of the candle you're hovering over. So the H is 110.46. So I would look at about 110.50, and if I hover over this, it's 110.54. So I take that back. 110.60 would be my entry for this, and then I'd take my first profit at 111.83 because we can see there's been previous history of that, and it's a Fibonacci line. And then from there, I would take my next profit at about 114 or so, because I can see that it starts to bounce down, and it had a pretty vigorous drop once it failed on the fib. So I think the smartest thing would be to take profits a little bit early. But that being said, going from 110.60 or so to 115 or 114, excuse me, is still a pretty major amount to make money off of. So that being said, is there anything you guys saw on Best Buy that I may have missed?
Yeah, so on my thinkorswim looks a little different just because I have different indicators and lines set. But I'm on the 20-day 1 hour chart, and
Okay.
I see a descending wedge pattern. And on my screen, on the top trend line, so the little breakout Best Buy had today. So it's hovering right above the top trend line I have. And what I'm expecting the following days, like tomorrow and then the next day, is if tomorrow it can bounce off that top trend line, I'd play calls. However, it's been above that top trend line before multiple times, and it's closed above it a couple times. But each time it's closed above it, it's managed to tank again the next day back into that wedge pattern. So tomorrow I'm either expecting an open that's really terrible and it's back into that wedge pattern, or I'm expecting a strong open, a clean break above the wedge pattern, and then we'd be able to play calls on it.
Okay, for sure. And that's something we'll continue to monitor, to be honest. I think when there's a pattern like that that's starting to form, it's really important to continue watching those and take your notes on them. So definitely happy you brought that up. And if you're listening, I mean, you will see things that other people don't. Other people will see things that you don't. That's why collaboration is so important, and that's what makes three-tier investing successful. So if you see something that we don't, shoot us a message in live chat, send a screenshot. If we're wrong, we'd love to hear it because that helps us improve anyways. So with that being said, if there's no more comments about Best Buy, let's move forward. Okay, great. I'm going to shift to edit. Editas Medicine. So this was a request. Let's take a look at how they've been moving. So looking at the 4-hour chart, obviously first thought that comes to mind is that they're directionally bearish, as they have been for some time. They peaked around $99.95. Again, keep in mind, it's not always about Fibonacci's and support and resistance. Sometimes it's a mental block. Just remember that Tesla once touched 1,000 and failed dramatically, not because it wasn't worth 1,000 or not because it was worth more at 990 than it was 1,000, right? But it's also that psychological mindset that people have. Every 100 level that Tesla hit, it would start failing. Same thing goes here. You see something like $100, it's okay to give up 10 cents of profit, 20 cents of profit, but to lock it in instead of having it go all the way, and now you got to sell it like 91. You know what I mean? So that being said, I'm going to redraw this as a channel, because I do see a bit of a channel vibe to it. I'd say more so starting here than in the past. So perhaps we can adjust that. Let me bring this in. Say starting here or so, we started seeing this proper channel formation. Now it's been pushing on the bottom, which tells me that it's, again, generally bearish. But with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and add a Fibonacci to this. Go to 99.95, bring it down to $27.01. So with that being said, that's a fairly large gap. So I'm gonna start adding some price lines based on what I'm seeing. I'm gonna add one here, right about there. Oh, I'm on the wrong tool. Excuse me. So I'm gonna put one right about here, and that's gonna be one of my resistance lines. Then I'm seeing, I saw a bit of consolidation here, and that's when we saw it spike off. We saw it try, fail, which doesn't tell me much, but we saw this huge drop. It sits on the Fibonacci for a bit, fell below, failed, or excuse me, found a base and bounced back. which is interesting. So then that's when it falls into this channel. And since February, it's been in this directionally bearish move up until about here when it started to find a little bit more of a bullish base. So you can see that we're kind of hovering around this this price point that we set earlier, right? This resistance line. So now we're seeing it start to consolidate its price a little bit more. It's finding a bit of a more bullish move, but we would need to be at least $39 minimum before I'd even consider entering. And in fact, you can even you could say for 39.50 if you really wanted to, just to play it safe. So there's definitely potential for this to break out of this channel and become bullish and start moving its way up to 44 and then up from there. With that being said, I'm actually going to add a few more resistance lines because I think they're going to help me figure out my targets a little bit better. Normally, I don't go too accurate with my lines. They help me figure out where there is a bit of a resistance or support, and then from there, I'm able to adjust it. So with that being said, if I were to play this, I would look for a high above 39.50. So 39.50 or so would be my entry. And then I would look around 44 to take my first level. Then I would look for 49 being my next level. And that's where I would most likely end my play. Now, that being said, if we were to play puts, I would look below 35.25. Actually, I take that back. I would look at 32. That's a pretty big gap. Yeah, I would say most likely 35, or yeah, we'll say about $35 as being the entry. And then from there, we can ride it to about 33 to $32. And from there, if it does fall, we could find ourselves falling almost all the way to about 29 to $27, because we know that it's been bearish and it hasn't crossed this trend line yet. So because it hasn't broken out of the channel, we can't say that it's going to. We need confirmation. We need for it to break out, retest, and then pop off. That's going to be the only way we can play this with certainty. So those are going to be my targets for edit. Once again, I'm going to look for an entry at 39.50. First target is going to be around 42 to 44 just to take profits. Above that, we can hit 45. 45 can go to 49. And then by that point, you should definitely be out. And then for puts, we'd probably look to enter about 35. We'd take profits around 33. And then below that, we can take profits at 32, and then 29, 75, and 27. And these will be part of tomorrow's watch list as well. So you don't have to worry about writing any of these down. Do you guys see anything that I don't, Ariane, Avneet? Okay, great. So with that being said, let's take a look at the next one. We're going to take a look at Goldman Sachs, stallion of a stock. So you can see that from their low of 185 back in October of 2020, they've been consistently growing in an upward trend. They did fall below, but they did find a base on this trend line. And that's when we saw them continue that growth. Ariane, if you remember, we saw a bit of an ascending triangle forming, which is what we saw here. It did pop off, and we found a price roof at 393.25. And below that, then we started to see it shuffle a little bit, and then it fell, found support on this resistance, or excuse me, the support, and has started to move back. So now if we switch to the 15-minute, I'm going to extend my time frame to 30 days. And what I can see is that, yeah, like I said, it peaked around this 39.26. So it has been bearish since the 7th of June and has been continuing to do so until it found a base on 348.13. So I'm just going to add right around there just for reference. And then we saw it do pretty well today. For those of you who don't know, we've been looking at FAS. And FAS is also a financial one. They did well, 7%. If you're looking for like an ETF that does, 3 times the movement, this is definitely a good one to take a look at. But let's go back to Goldman. Banking did pretty well today, which is something we're pretty happy about. So the struggle over here is that I feel like there's a bit of a resistance right around here at the 358 mark, right? we can see that it falls around this price, tries to fall below, but fails, brings itself back, and then it took this gap for it to fall below. So there was enough, you can see 783,000 shares that were traded within this 15-minute time frame that made it fall this much. Found a base right around here and bounced off, struggled between these two, found a lower base, and then moved upwards. So I would look for entry above 358, and I would look for some type of profit taking at 360 or so. And we can see right around here that there's turbulence on this price. So 360 would most likely be my first profit taking. And if you were to continue upwards and the stock were to continue moving, I think 362.50 or so is a perfect second level. And above that, you'd be risking it, but those would be my targets for that. As for puts, let's see. I am seeing a bit of an uptrend on here. Ariane, do you think that looks like an ascending triangle? What do you think? Because I know you were taking a look at Goldman before.
Yeah, so that looks a lot more like an ascending triangle. It's a tiny
Right.
one, but it is there. So then if we can see a break above that resistance line, it will fill that gap. I'd be very bullish if we can break above that resistance and stay above.
Phenomenal. So with that being said, do you have any targets that you were looking at for the stock?
No, so Goldman Sachs, I actually wanted to play puts, except
Okay.
today it ruined my whole entire setup. So I'll probably be drawing up a bunch of different things tonight.
Totally. And you know what? That's exactly why we plan for both sides, because things just don't always go our way, and that's okay. So I would personally look to enter around 355, and I would want to take my first profits around 353.50. That's a lot of similar numbers. And then I would look to take advantage of this gap over here. Actually, that's not a gap. I take that back. I would look to take advantage of this volatile range here and go to about 350.50 or so. So that's about a $5 move almost that you could make within a day, assuming the volume is there and the failure is there for puts. So those are going to be the targets for Goldman Sachs. Would you guys agree, disagree, or what would be the next step? Should we move forward?
No, I agree with you.
Okay, perfect. So after Goldman, we're gonna take a look at one more. Was there something that you guys wanted to take a look at, Ariane of Need? Anything in specific?
Maybe
You
Home
could.
Depot.
Home Depot?
Because Home Depot, they've been trading in a descending channel. So not a wedge, not a descending triangle, but just a little channel. And
Uh-huh.
today it broke above the top trend line. And as
Yeah.
soon as it broke above, it shot up. And now it's at a little area of consolidation.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna adjust this real quick. That looks a little bit better. Let me know if you guys disagree with my drawings. I don't know if I agree with that myself. I'm gonna redraw it because I want to make sure I do this right. I will say right around here. That looks interesting. This is what I'm kind of seeing more of. Right around here. So this almost looks like a descending wedge to me. But it did fail over here. What do you think, Ariane? Is this
Yeah,
similar to
so
what you saw?
it's similar. So our top trend line is the exact same,
Okay.
but my bottom trend line is a lot shorter and I have it plotted on different points. But
Okay.
then again, this is exactly why we have multiple people look over these.
Right.
Because different people see different things. We look at different time frames, we use different candles
Mhm.
and all that. So
Isn't it cool? And this is what I love about trading most, is just that sometimes it just makes sense. Like, yeah, we've got a Fibonacci here. And would you look at that? It's struggling, right? So that tells you that if right, you see there's no volume in the day. There's barely anything. So it's unable to cross. There's not enough momentum to carry it over this resistance and break through that. So that's why price action is so important to watch. But looking at this in terms of targets, right? I would want to enter at about 309. I think 309 would be a good first entry. let's say 309.50 because I see it topped off here and fell off. I think 309.50. In fact, I would stand by that price because if we go to about 309.50, right about here, we can see quite a bit of turbulence about like right around that 350 line. So I would enter at 309.50 with the next target being at 311. So I'm not a line here, about 311. And above 311, I would look at somewhere around here. Looking at about 312.25. Yeah. Yeah, because I'm looking at right over here top, right over here top, tried and failed. So that would be my next level is about 312.50. And I would probably look to exit by then because that's a pretty steep price increase. And then for puts, I would want to look below the price of 306. In fact, I would look to enter at about 306, and I would set my first target for 304, and below 304, I could see it fall to about 301.50. And I think that would be a strong target for us in terms of plays. Is there anything you guys see separately or anything you'd agree, disagree with?
No, I agree with the calls puts.
Okay,
I do
perfect.
as well.
Okay, sweet. So I think with that, again, I hopefully you guys learned from this that it doesn't have to be super difficult, doesn't have to be super crazy. If you can understand your different support and resistance levels, you can actually use these targets as a way to build confidence when you're trading and be able to find strong levels for you to just quickly enter and quickly exit just because they're support and resistance levels. Simplify your trading, continue learning. If we've misspoken or if we've made a mistake, we do humbly apologize, and hopefully you can help us, identify that so we can learn. But with that being said, I do think we're wrapping up today's session. If there are any questions, feel free to shoot us a message in the live chat. But with that being said, I do think we should wrap up. Avneet, Ariane, do you guys have any comments before we do end the call?
No, this
No,
is
nothing on
beautiful.
my end.
All right, with that, guys, we are going to call it a night. Hopefully this video was helpful. Once again, if you guys have any questions, shoot us a message. With that, keep learning, keep loving, keep growing. Have a great day, guys. Thank you.